Hello and welcome to Upstack America's Oracle EBS Financials Functional Training. My name is Bob and I'm the lead senior consultant for Upstack America. And with me today I have Victor, who is also senior consultant. And today we are handling General Ledger Lesson 59. And Victor, please walk us through.
Thank you, Bob, for the introduction, and welcome to this lesson of our Oracle Financials Functional Training series. We are still on the topic of secondary ledgers. In our previous session, we looked at how we can use the secondary ledger to achieve different results in terms of creating a different representation of a company. And we saw that when we need to have a different representation in terms of the forces, any of them or a combination of any of them, then secondary ledgers come in handy to achieve this result. We also said that we have three types of secondary ledgers. We can create secondary ledgers at balances level. We can create secondary ledgers at journals level, and we can also create secondary ledgers at subledger level. At balances level, the secondary ledger is created, or rather data is moved to the secondary ledger through consolidation. Okay, so once we create the secondary ledger, then we have to do a consolidation data transfer so that we can populate this ledger, to put it that way. At journals level, the journals that are posted in the primary ledger to which the secondary ledger is linked, they are replicated to the secondary ledger by the posting program. So once you post a journal in your primary ledger, then a ledger is another journal is automatically created, a replication of the one that you just posted, and it is created in the journals level secondary ledger. As we will see, we can have the option of choosing whether these journals are automatically posted or they are left unposted after the replication. And we also see that that's one of the differences between secondary ledgers and reporting currency ledgers. For the sub-ledger level, journals can be created either by the Create Accounting program or the Posting program. Create Accounting program will create journals that are coming from sub-ledger modules, Oracle sub-ledger modules. So just as in the reporting currency ledgers. So once you hit Create Accounting, then a journal is created for both your primary ledger and your secondary ledger. For journals that we enter manually in our primary ledger, then they are replicated to the secondary ledger by the posting program. Okay, so for the sub-ledger level, you have these two programs that do the replication to the secondary ledger. We went ahead and looked at the different scenarios where we can use secondary ledgers, and we won't go through that again. So what I would like us to take a look at is how secondary ledgers differ to reporting currency ledgers, which will help us cement our understanding of both types of ledgers. So to begin with, a secondary ledger can differ in any of the four C's with the primary ledger, including all of them. Okay, so the primary ledger and the secondary ledger can differ in any of the four C's, and that's including the functional currency, and it can differ in either one of them or all of them together. On the other hand, reporting currency ledger only differs with the primary ledger in terms of the functional currency. Okay, so everything else in a reporting currency ledger is the same. The chart of accounts is shared with the primary ledger, so is the accounting calendar, and so is the accounting convention. So the only thing that can be different between the reporting currency ledger and the primary ledger is the functional currency, which is not the case with the secondary ledger. That also moves us to the second point, all right? So which is that when we create a secondary ledger, a separate data access set is created, separate from the one for the primary ledger. Okay, so remember, a data access set is what allows us to view information in a ledger, all right? So we're able to see journals or whatever else the data access set allows us to see if it is one that we have created for ourselves. But remember that in the case of reporting currency ledger, once we create the reporting currency ledger, a data access set is created for that reporting currency ledger, but at the same time, that reporting currency ledger is also added to the data access set for the primary ledger. So if you have created reporting currency ledger and you go to the data access set screen, for example, if you have one primary ledger and you have created one reporting currency ledger, you will see one data access set for the reporting currency ledger, and then you will see another data access set that has the primary ledger and the reporting currency ledger together. So the reporting currency ledger is automatically added to the data access set for the primary ledger once you create your reporting currency ledger. This is not the case for secondary ledger, where a separate data access set, separate from the one linked to the primary ledger, is created. What are the implications of this? Then this means that in case of the reporting currency ledger, we can have the same responsibility, all right, to view information in both the reporting currency ledger and the primary ledger. So remember, we attach a data access set to a responsibility, and then we assign that responsibility to the user. Okay, so once we create a reporting currency ledger, the data access set is created whereby the reporting currency ledger is added to that one of the primary ledger. And since that data access set at the point we are assuming has already been assigned to a responsibility, then that same responsibility can be used to view both the primary ledger and the reporting currency ledger. In case of the secondary ledger, we have to assign the data access set that is created to a different responsibility. All right, we have to manually attach that data access set to a different responsibility or the same responsibility if that is possible. For example, in the case where we create a secondary ledger where the only difference is the currency. And by the way, we can have a secondary ledger which only differs to the primary ledger in terms of currency. And that does not necessarily mean that it's the same as a reporting currency ledger, and we will see why that is the reason, all right? But the main point here is that in the case of the reporting currency ledger, both of them, due to the similar data access set, can have the same responsibility, will have the same responsibility, okay? What is the other difference between secondary ledgers and reporting currency ledgers? So For secondary ledgers, for all three levels, they are real ledgers, all right? So they are real ledgers that we create, and as such, we can do a journal entry, and we also manage periods, all right? We can do journal entry directly into those ledgers, and we also have to manage periods, meaning opening and closing of periods. Because these are real ledgers that we create, the secondary ledgers. Though they are linked to our primary ledgers, but they are separate ledgers that we have to manage individually. For the reporting currency ledger, we know that at the balances level, the ledger is virtual, which means that as soon as we run translation, a virtual ledger is created at the balances level. And we know that for this virtual ledger, we don't have to manage periods or anything like that. We don't have to even create this particular kind of reporting currency ledger. It is automatically created once we run translation. We can also not enter data directly into this balances level reporting currency ledger. For the other levels of conversion at the journals level and at the sub-ledger level, we know that we have to independently manage periods, and we can also directly enter journals manually into those ledgers. So in that sense, at those two conversion levels, the journals level and the sub-ledger level, we can say that secondary ledger and reporting currency ledgers are similar. Let's move on to the next feature, which is in secondary ledger, we have to manually configure the auto post feature, all right, so that when journals are replicated, are created in the primary ledger and replicated to the secondary ledger, if we want them to be automatically posted, then it's something that we have to manually configure. However, we saw that in the case of reporting currency ledger, journals are automatically posted in the case of the this should say journals level and sub-ledger level reporting currency ledgers. For the journals level, once you post the journal in your primary ledger, it is automatically replicated and converted, of course, into the reporting currency and posted in that journals level reporting currency ledger. Same for the sub-ledger level, create accounting or posting program will replicate the journal in the reporting currency and post that journal in the reporting currency ledger. If we want that to happen in our secondary ledger, it's something that we have to manually configure. Let's look at the last feature on the screen, whereby we say that for secondary ledgers, all ledger options are available, while for reporting currency ledger, we have limited ledger options. And this is where we come back to the thing I just mentioned about the currency. You can create a secondary ledger which differs from the primary ledger only in terms of the functional currency, but that doesn't mean it's the same as a reporting currency ledger. Why? Because a reporting currency ledger will not offer you all the ledger options, unlike a secondary ledger. What do I mean by ledger options? When we are creating our ledger, we have those 4 pages of options that we have to enter, where we enter in the first page, for example, the chart of accounts and things like the first period ever open, and then we have where we enter retained earnings account and so on and so forth. In the reporting currency ledger, we don't have all those options provided for us. But for secondary ledger, because we said it's a real ledger, then those options are available. And in that sense, this particular feature can be a deciding factor on whether you want to have a secondary ledger or a reporting currency ledger. Okay. So those are some of the differences and similarities between secondary ledgers and reporting currency ledgers. And perhaps some of the things that you should consider when advising a client on when you're creating either secondary ledgers or reporting currency ledger. Those are some of the things that we should take into consideration. So now we have understood what a secondary ledger is. We know the different levels. We mentioned that at the balances level for the secondary ledger, then the secondary ledger is populated once we run consolidation data transfer. And we know that because we have already done this, that consolidation data transfer doesn't have to take place between a primary ledger and a secondary ledger. It can take place between two primary ledgers. So in that case, the balances level secondary ledger is not a very common way of offering alternative representation of the company, because you have to do a consolidation, right, to populate that ledger. But if you want something that will enable you maybe to continually track the accounting information in your ledger, but in a different representation, then the other two levels, the journals level and the sub-ledger level, will work very well. So again, those are some of the things that you should advise a client when deciding on what kind of secondary ledger to create. All right, so how do we create a secondary ledger? We go to the accounting setups page, and then we add a secondary ledger. Okay, so it's as easy as that. Of course, there are options that we have to fill in, and we are going to see that when we go to that page. However, let's see what we are going to do in our case. We are going to create a secondary ledger at the journals level. All right, so we are not going to do at the balances level or at the sub-ledger level. We are going to do it at the journals level. Now, how are we going to do it? When we were dealing with the topic of consolidation, we had the parent company, which was our Maskani Enterprises, which has Maskani Developers and Maskani Property Managers, which we assumed had acquired another company based in Kenya called Getao Enterprises. Okay, so Getao Enterprises at this moment we can say is a subsidiary, all right, of Maskani Enterprises. Okay, so the way we are going to implement our secondary ledger is that in this case, the primary ledger is going to be the primary ledger for Getao Enterprises. All right. So the primary ledger is not the primary ledger for Maskani, rather it's the primary ledger for Getao Enterprises. So now, since Getao Enterprises was acquired by Maskani, what do they want to do? They want to maintain a secondary ledger, right? And what that secondary ledger will do is that it will have a chart of accounts that is similar to that of Maskani. Okay, so this is Getao Enterprises primary ledger, and then we are going to create a secondary ledger, and that secondary ledger is going to have the same chart of accounts structure as Maskani. Okay, so it might differ in currency, it might differ in the accounting calendar, but the chart of accounts is going to be the same. And what that means is that every time we post a journal here, the journal is replicated to the secondary ledger, and it's going to be in the same format as what we see when we are entering journals in our Maskani ledger. Okay, and what does that allow Getao Enterprises to do? It allows Getao Enterprises that when they need to do consolidation, right, from Getao Enterprises to Maskani, then they can just do the consolidation from the secondary ledger, where the mapping will be one-to-one, because the format of the chart of accounts, the chart of account structure is similar to that of Maskani. They can even go a step further, maybe, and create a reporting currency ledger based on this, linked to this secondary ledger, and have that reporting currency ledger in the same currency as Maskani, which is USD. Remember, this primary ledger in Getao Enterprises is in Kenya shillings, and this secondary ledger is also going to be in Kenya shillings. Okay, but we can also have a reporting currency ledger in USD here. So basically, Getao Enterprises can be able to track their transactions in a format that is the same as that of the parent ledger throughout the month, and even in the same currency, if we create a reporting currency for this secondary ledger. But this is the setup that we are going to have, and just wanted to explain what our setup is going to look like. All right. So we said this is the navigation that we follow in order to create a journals level secondary ledger. So let's go to Oracle. And I'm going to log in as my normal. So when we were doing our consolidation, we had created a responsibility, Getao Enterprise super user, and this responsibility is linked to the primary ledger for what? For Getao Enterprises. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to go and create a secondary ledger for Getao Enterprise. So we are going to go to accounting setups. And here what we are going to look for is Getao. So these are the ledgers, right? So we have the primary ledger, and we have a journals level reporting currency ledger for Getao Enterprise. So let's select the update accounting options. So what do we do when we want to create a secondary ledger? We go down here, and you can see the secondary option header here, and we click on add secondary ledger. So once you do that, this is the page that opens. So you have to give a name to your ledger. All right. So we can call this Gitao secondary ledger. For the chart of accounts, we want this secondary ledger to have the same chart of accounts as Maskani. All right, we want this chart of accounts to have the same chart of account structure as Maskani. That is a kind of representation that we want to have. So here we are going to search for Maskani. And this is the Maskani group chart of accounts. So select. For the accounting calendar, we are going to leave it the same as what Gitao is already using. So actually, let's first just cancel this and let's go to Gitao's ledger and see everything that it's using. All right. So it's using, the currency is Kenya shillings. The chart of accounts is Gitao's chart of account, and this is the calendar. And this is the sub-ledger accounting method. Okay, so those are the 4 C's. All right. So what we are going to change is the chart of accounts in creating our secondary ledger. So it's going to be the same in every sense apart from chart of accounts. All right. On the other hand, if we look at Maskani, here is Maskani. Let's look quickly at the features here. So Maskani is using US dollars, and this is the chart of accounts. This is the calendar, and you can see the period type is different, and that's the accounting convention. Okay. So we want our secondary ledger to be similar to Maskani in terms of the chart of accounts. So we are going to give it this Maskani group chart of accounts. All right. So that's good. Let's go back. So now let's go back and create our secondary ledger. And let's click here. Sorry. Let's go down to secondary ledgers and click on add secondary ledger. Now let's give it the name. Let's keep that. The chart of accounts, as we have said, we want it to be Maskani. The accounting calendar is going to be Gitao. So Gitao's calendar. Currency, we want it to remain in Kenya shillings. We don't have to enter the sub ledger accounting method because our data conversion level is at the journals level. But if this was at the sub ledger level, then we would have to specify an accounting convention because this determines how accounting is created from the sub ledger modules. But since we are doing ours at the journals level, we don't have to specify anything. So these are the mandatory features. Even as you can see, we have asterisks on each of the mandatory ones: chart of accounts, accounting calendar, currency, and data conversion level. So we can click on apply here. And as you can see, our secondary ledger has been created. Okay. And while it has been created, remember we said that secondary ledgers provide us full ledger options. Okay. So we still have to go and specify some ledger options for the secondary ledger, because as you can see down here, we don't have these green ticks, which indicate that everything is ready. So we have to go and update our ledger options. So click on this update option, and this is the page that we get to. You should be somewhat familiar with this page because you've seen it before when we are creating our ledgers. So description, we can have the same as the name. We have already selected the currency and the chart of accounts. We want this to be our first ever open period, which is the first period in this calendar, and we'll keep the number of future enterable periods as 1. Okay, now we have to enter retained earnings account. All right, and we are entering the retained earnings account in what format? In the format of the new chart of accounts, not the one for Getao, but Maskani, because that is the chart of accounts that this secondary ledger is using. All right, so we can just take that. We want this to be our retained earnings account, which should be 3,000 here. Select. We can have the default division. We can have default for this too. Oh, so it actually looks like the code combination is down here already, so we can just select this instead of entering each segment. So we can see that that's our retained earnings account. You can enter all these other options here. All right. If we are going to create a reporting currency ledger based on this secondary ledger, then we have to enter the translation options, including the CTA account. But we are not going to do that right now, so we can just click on next. Again, if you have want to enter any of these other ledger options, you can go ahead, but we are not using any of these at the moment. So select next. All right. And it looks like everything is okay. Just ensure that that's the name and description. The calendar looks fine. And we have entered our retained earnings account there. So we can finish. So under ledger options, we have completed everything. And you can see the status has changed to this green tick. Okay. Now, as you can see, there's 2 options here with asterisks, the ledger options. And the primary to secondary ledger mapping. So why do we need to do primary to secondary ledger mapping? Just like when we were doing the consolidation, when the chart of accounts are different, then we need to tell the system that if we enter something in this ledger and we want it to be copied and transferred to another ledger with a different chart of accounts, then we need to know how values are mapping to each other, right? So we create a chart of accounts mapping. In the same case for secondary ledger, we are creating a different representation of the company in the secondary ledger, but the information is basically the same, okay? So what we need to do is to tell Oracle how to map information from the primary ledger to the secondary ledger. So that's why we need to specify the primary to secondary ledger mapping. So click on this update button, and you can see the primary ledger is given to you here, and the secondary ledger is given to you here. The names, you can see what differs is the chart of accounts. The accounting calendar is the same. The currency is the same. All right. So we need to create mapping between these two chart of accounts, Gethouse chart of accounts and Mascani Group chart of accounts. Okay. Again, if you recall, when we were doing consolidation, we did the same kind of mapping. All right. So here we can go and look for the chart of accounts mapping that we used and use that same one to define the mapping between these two ledgers, the primary and the secondary. So if you click here, and I believe our mappings had the description Getao to Mascani. So let's search for that. All right. So these are the chart of account mappings that we created when you're doing consolidation, and we are going to use one of them. I'm going to use Getao to Mascani Enterprise 2. I believe we had an issue with this first one, so we created another one. That's why it has the number 2. And this is a segment rules chart of accounts mapping. Okay. We can go to the chart of accounts mapping page and take a look at exactly how the mapping is going to take place. But for now, we can just select this as our mapping. All right. If you scroll down here, you will see what we call the journal conversion rules. So you can say what are the two options we have here. We have post journals automatically from source ledger. So we can see it's defaulted to no. And what does this mean? It means that when the journal is replicated from the primary ledger and to the secondary ledger, it won't be automatically posted in the secondary ledger unless we select this option as yes. All right. But we are going to leave it as no. And we have this other option that says retain journal creator from primary ledger. And we are also going to leave that as yes, the default. Down here, you also have other options that allow you to specify what you want to go to your secondary ledger and what you don't want to. For example, you can say that journals from the category Arthur, you don't want it to be transferred to the secondary ledger. And you can do that by selecting no, okay? But we're not going to touch anything there. We're just going to leave it the way it is, all right? So you can click on this complete button. And if you go down here now, you will see that you have a green tick against the mapping and a green tick against the ledger options. We did disable one of our reporting currency ledgers, and we pressed this button to disable. So in the same way, you can disable conversion for your secondary ledger. And once you do that, remember it's irreversible. Okay, so you have to be sure that you want to stop having the secondary ledger before you disable. All right, so we can return to our accounting set steps. And now you can see we have the TAOS ledger as the primary, and we have a journals level reporting currency, and we also have a journals level secondary ledger. Knowing what we know now about secondary ledgers, we know that we still can't access this ledger unless we do what? We assign it to a responsibility and then to a user. Because unlike the reporting currency ledger, which is automatically added to the data access set of the primary ledger, that doesn't happen when you create a secondary ledger. So we still have to assign this to a responsibility and then to a user. Okay, and then after that, we are going to see how the secondary ledger works. But we are going to look at that in our next lesson, and we are going to see exactly what happens when we post journals in our primary ledger and how they are replicated and created in our secondary ledger. But anyway, Bob, unless you have something to add, we can end our lesson there.
All right. Thank you so much, Victor. I think I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.